Number 1. The seed of The Last Starfighter was not born in a studio meeting or a Hollywood pitch room. It came from an arcade. Screenwriter Jonathan R. Betuel was standing in front of a video game cabinet, watching a teenager chase a high score. Sweat on his hands, eyes locked to the screen, completely absorbed. And a question formed that changed everything. What if this wasn't just a game? What if it was a test? Not a metaphor, not a fantasy, an actual recruitment tool, disguised as entertainment. A way to find pilots, warriors, heroes hidden in plain sight. That single thought became the backbone of the film. Alex Rogan doesn't win a game, he passes an exam, and the reward isn't fame or money, but a one-way ticket out of his life. At the time, the idea felt risky. Universal wasn't immediately convinced. But the early 1980s arcade boom made the concept impossible to ignore. Kids across America were feeding quarters into machines, chasing digital glory without realizing how deeply those games had already rewired their imagination. The Last Starfighter didn't just reflect that obsession. It weaponized it. A joystick, a glowing screen, and one perfect score that opened the door to the stars. Number 2. Alex Rogan was not always a trailer park kid. In early drafts, his story unfolded in a quiet suburban neighborhood, green lawns, picket fences, safe and familiar. But the studio immediately saw a problem. It felt too close to other coming-of-age sci-fi films of the era, too clean, too comfortable. So Betuel made a decisive change. He dropped Alex into a dusty trailer park, surrounded by rusted cars, cramped homes, and a future that felt already decided. The shift added grit, it grounded the fantasy, and more importantly, it changed what the story was really about. Alex wasn't escaping boredom, he was escaping limitation. The trailer park wasn't just a setting, it was a pressure cooker, a place where dreams stalled and ambition had nowhere to go. When Alex is chosen, the contrast becomes brutal. One moment he's fixing power generators for his neighbors. The next, he's staring down alien armadas. That contrast gave the film its emotional core. This wasn't a boy leaving home. It was a boy outrunning gravity. And that made his leap into the stars feel lonelier, riskier, and far more heroic. Number 3. Lance Guest became Alex Rogan, but he was never the studio's first choice. Universal wanted a name, someone already famous, someone who could sell tickets on reputation alone. Michael J. Fox was considered during his Family Ties rise, but television commitments kept him unavailable. Other young actors tested, flirted with the role, and walked away. Even Maggie's casting wasn't settled. Several recognizable names floated through the conversation before Catherine Mary Stewart entered the picture. What ultimately won wasn't star power, it was chemistry. Guest and Stewart didn't feel like movie stars. They felt like real people, two teenagers stuck in a place they didn't choose, quietly dreaming of somewhere else. Their performances grounded the film in emotional credibility that a bigger cast might have erased. The irony is sharp. The casting didn't create celebrities. It created belief. And in a story about an ordinary kid chosen for something extraordinary, that authenticity mattered more than any famous face ever could. Number 4. Before Nick Castle ever stepped behind the camera, The Last Starfighter almost belonged to a very different filmmaker. Universal quietly courted a young director who had just shaken Hollywood with a low-budget science fiction film about machines and fate. James Cameron had proven he could turn limited resources into explosive spectacle. For a brief moment, it looked like he might take control of The Last Starfighter. But timing intervened, schedules clashed, ambitions pulled Cameron elsewhere. He would soon disappear into projects that became Aliens and The Abyss, leaving this film behind at a critical fork in the road. Instead, the job went to Nick Castle. The difference mattered. A Cameron-directed version might have leaned darker, harsher, more militaristic. Castle brought something else entirely, a fairy tale sensibility, optimism, a belief in destiny rather than domination. This single decision reshaped the film's soul. Where Cameron might have built a war story, Castle built a dream. And at that crossroads, The Last Starfighter chose wonder over brutality. Number 5. Nick Castle was not an obvious choice. To horror fans, he was already iconic, but not as a director. Castle had once worn the mask of Michael Myers in Halloween, becoming the silent shape that stalked suburban nightmares. A faceless killer, a symbol of fear. In 1984, he did something unexpected. He stepped away from shadows and knives and embraced starlight. Castle swapped Carpenter's minimalism for computer-generated galaxies, trading dread for hope. That contrast gave The Last Starfighter a strange emotional pulse. Beneath its laser battles and alien threats, the film radiated sincerity. This was not cynicism dressed as science fiction. It was belief. Castle treated the story as a modern myth about love, courage, and being chosen when you least expect it. The same man who once terrified audiences now told a story about a kid who dares to leave home. That tonal shift became the film's quiet signature. Number 6. In 1984, space battles were still built by hand. Miniatures, model ships, wires, painted starfields. It was a proven system, trusted by every major science fiction production of the era. The Last Starfighter rejected it entirely. Instead, the filmmakers gambled everything on computers. Nearly 27 minutes of the film, almost every ship, explosion, and dogfight were created digitally. No safety net, no precedent. The work was done on a Cray XMP supercomputer, one of only a handful in existence at the time. Each frame pushed the machine to its limit, hundreds of thousands of polygons, render times that stretched endlessly. When animators attempted to visualize the Gunstar's ultimate weapon, the spinning Death Blossom, the system crashed repeatedly under the strain. Marketing later claimed CGI was faster and cheaper. The truth was far uglier. The technology was fragile, temperamental, on the verge of collapse. One wrong calculation could have erased months of work, but against all odds, it held. That gamble didn't just create a movie. It fired the opening shot of a revolution, one that would eventually lead to Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, and the digital cinema that dominates screens today. The Gunstar didn't just fight a galactic war. It rewrote the rules of filmmaking. Number 7. The villain's cruelty was meant to be unmistakable. In early cuts of The Last Starfighter, one scene pushed far darker than anything that survived the final film. The antagonist was supposed to demonstrate his power by publicly executing a spy, his brain fried live on a massive screen, skin glowing, body convulsing. No ambiguity. The scene was fully shot. Then reality intervened. To preserve a PG rating, director Nick Castle was forced to dismantle it. What remained was barely a second long, a flash of red light across the victim's forehead. Blink, and it's gone. The timing couldn't have been worse. Only weeks later, the PG-13 rating was introduced. Had the film been released slightly later, the entire sequence could have stayed intact. Instead, one of the most brutal moments ever filmed for a PG movie was melted down in the editing room. What audiences saw was restraint. What they never saw was how close the film came to crossing a line. That erased scene became a ghost proof that The Last Starfighter nearly carried a much darker edge. Number 8. On screen, Centauri's star car looked effortless. Sleek, futuristic, a glowing promise of escape from Earth. It slid into frame like a vehicle from a pulp science fiction dream. On set, it was a disaster. The car was loud, slow, and mechanically fragile. It struggled to move in a straight line. The gold-colored doors jammed. The fiberglass body rattled constantly. Every dramatic arrival required careful camera placement and editing tricks just to sell the illusion of speed. Nick Castle later admitted that shooting with the vehicle was more frustration than fantasy. What audiences saw as advanced alien technology was, in reality, a barely functional prop held together by patience and patchwork fixes. It became a perfect metaphor for the film itself. Dazzling in concept, clumsy in execution, and somehow charming because of it. Number 9. Centauri was written for one man from the very beginning. The role was tailored to Robert Preston, a performer best known for his fast-talking charisma as Harold Hill in The Music Man. In many ways, Centauri was that character reborn this time as a cosmic recruiter instead of a traveling salesman. Preston brought old-school theatrical energy into a film dominated by emerging technology. His timing, his voice, his confidence grounded the digital spectacle in something human. For Preston, the role carried deeper meaning. The Last Starfighter became his final theatrical performance. When Centauri drives away in his star car, it isn't just a character exiting the story, it's a farewell, a last bow from a performer whose charm belonged to an earlier era of Hollywood. Surrounded by CGI ships and alien wars, Preston reminded audiences of something timeless. Technology can change cinema, but charisma still carries the story. Number 10. Before he became a familiar face in science fiction, Wil Wheaton almost appeared in The Last Starfighter and almost disappeared entirely. Wheaton was cast as a local kid in the trailer park, part of Alex Rogan's everyday world. He filmed scenes, he delivered lines. For a brief moment, it looked like his first step into the genre. Then the edit happened. Nearly all of his material was removed. When the film reached theaters, Wheaton was barely visible, a background figure you'd miss unless you knew exactly where to look. His presence became a trivia footnote rather than a breakout role. At the time, it felt like a dead end. 2 years later, everything changed. Stand By Me. Then Star Trek, The Next Generation. The career that The Last Starfighter failed to launch arrived anyway, just on a different path. Sometimes the roles that vanish are not failures, they are delays. Number 11. Audiences left theaters with one question burning in their minds. Where was the game? In the film, Alex Rogan's destiny begins at an arcade cabinet called Starfighter. Viewers assumed it was real. Atari even fueled the illusion, teasing the game in the end credits and quietly building full arcade prototypes. The machines worked, they existed. Then the industry collapsed. The video game crash of 1983 devastated Atari, and the arcade release was scrapped before it ever reached the public. The cabinets were locked away. Rumors spread. Fans searched pizza parlors and bowling alleys for a machine that never officially launched. Years later, an NES cartridge appeared bearing the Last Starfighter name. But it wasn't the game audiences imagined. It was a reskinned version of Uridium, stripped of the cinematic promise that inspired the film. What remained was one of pop culture's great what-ifs, a Destiny game that never let anyone play. Number 12. The beta unit was never meant to matter. Originally, Alex Rogan's android duplicate existed as a quick gag, a clumsy placeholder left on Earth, while the real hero fought in space. But early test screenings changed everything. Audiences loved Beta. His awkward smile, his stiff movements, his failed attempts at being human. The laughter was immediate and consistent. The filmmakers responded by expanding the role with additional scenes. For the audience, it worked perfectly. For Lance Guest, it was brutal. By the time reshoots began, Guest had already cut his hair, forcing him into an uncomfortable wig. The prosthetics were thick, hot, and suffocating. He was sick during much of the process, spending long days sealed inside latex under harsh lights. On screen, Beta became comic relief. Behind the scenes, he became endurance. It was a reminder of a quiet truth in filmmaking. What makes an audience laugh often comes from someone else's discomfort. Number 13. Alex and Maggie were not always Alex and Maggie. In early drafts of the script, the characters carried very different names, Skip and Penny, names that sounded playful, lightweight, almost cartoonish. Director Nick Castle hated them. To Castle, the story wasn't a comic strip. It was meant to feel grounded, intimate, and real. These were not fantasy archetypes. They were kids you might actually know, kids trapped in a place they didn't choose. The names were changed deliberately. Alex and Maggie sounded ordinary, familiar, like people you might pass at a gas station or see working a late shift at a diner. That subtle adjustment anchored the film's fantasy in reality. It was a small change with a large effect. By stripping away whimsy, the film made its emotional stakes believable. When Alex leaves Earth, he isn't abandoning a fictional world. He's leaving a life that feels painfully close to home. Number 14. One bold idea nearly altered the film before it even began. Instead of opening with Universal's iconic spinning globe, the filmmakers proposed something radical. They wanted to replace the studio logo with Rios, the alien planet at the center of the story. The goal was immersion, to drop audiences straight into the cosmos before they had time to orient themselves. Universal refused. Executives feared confusion. Branding rules were sacred. The globe stayed. Rios was delayed. It was a quiet rejection, but a revealing one. Even in a film built on risk and experimentation, certain lines could not be crossed. Studio identity came before narrative ambition. What was lost was a statement. Had the idea survived, The Last Starfighter might have announced itself immediately as something different. Instead, it eased audiences in gently, Earth first, stars later. A tiny what if. Another door that never fully opened. Number 15. The Gunstar was never meant to feel familiar. Designed by visionary artist Ron Cobb, the ship rejected the patchwork model tradition used in Star Wars. No recycled airplane parts, no physical kit bashing. The Gunstar was conceived specifically for a digital future. Sharp lines, angular symmetry, clean geometry. It was designed to exist inside a computer. Rendered entirely through CGI, the Gunstar felt different from anything audiences had seen in 1984. Less tactile, more abstract, a ship born from math instead of glue. That difference mattered. The Gunstar became one of cinema's earliest digital icons, standing apart from the X-Wing or the Millennium Falcon. It didn't feel lived in, it felt new, unsettling, forward-looking. It wasn't just a vehicle in a story, it was proof that science fiction was changing shape. And once that shape appeared on screen, there was no going back. Number 16. The DNA of Tron runs quietly through The Last Starfighter. Many of the visual effects artists who worked on the film had recently come off Disney's 1982 experiment with digital worlds. They carried that knowledge with them, along with unused concepts originally developed for other science fiction projects, including early design ideas connected to Alien. Those influences shaped the film's visual identity. Rios didn't look gritty or lived in. The ships didn't feel dirty or mechanical. Everything was glossy, sharp, and slightly unreal. The universe looked less like a battlefield and more like something rendered inside a machine. At the time, this divided audiences. Some felt it lacked texture, others felt it looked artificial, but in hindsight, that was the point. The Last Starfighter didn't want to resemble Star Wars. It wanted to resemble a game, a world you could almost control. A universe built from logic, light, and geometry. That choice gave the film a look decades ahead of its time and sealed its identity as something stranger and more experimental than its contemporaries. Number 17. Like many science fiction films of the era, The Last Starfighter didn't end its life in theaters. It moved sideways. In 1984, Marvel Comics published a 3-issue adaptation of the film, translating the story into bold panels and bright cosmic color. For fans, it became one of the few ways to revisit the adventure after it left cinemas. The comic leaned into the film's pulpy roots. Ron Cobb's ship designs carried over. Certain moments were expanded. The universe felt larger on the page than it ever could on a limited effects budget. For a generation raised on comic shops and VHS shelves, the adaptation mattered. It kept the story alive during a period when movies didn't instantly become collectibles. Before streaming, before home media dominance, for a film born from arcade culture, it was fitting that its afterlife lived in another medium built on imagination. Number 18. Universal wanted The Last Starfighter to become its own Star Wars. Plans were drawn, merchandise was discussed, toys were envisioned, sequels were quietly imagined. The studio was ready to build a franchise. Then the numbers came in. The film doubled its production budget, earning roughly $28 million worldwide against a $15 million cost. Respectable, but not explosive, not empire-building. Compared to George Lucas's Phenomenon, it looked small. The merchandise plans collapsed. The toys never reached production. The franchise dream faded before it could take shape. What remained was a film stranded between success and failure. Too ambitious to ignore, too modest to dominate. And in that space, The Last Starfighter began its slow transformation from missed opportunity into cult classic. Number 19. At first, The Last Starfighter seemed destined to fade. It wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a phenomenon either. Released into a crowded summer of science fiction, it quietly passed through theaters and slipped out of the spotlight. For a moment, it looked like just another ambitious experiment that didn't quite land. Then, something changed. Cable television, late-night reruns, VHS tapes passed between friends. Audiences who had missed it in theaters found it at home, rewinding the space battles, quoting Centauri's lines, and imagining themselves standing in front of that arcade cabinet. Slowly, the film found its people. By the 1990s, The Last Starfighter had become a cult classic, not because it dominated pop culture, but because it connected deeply with a specific kind of dreamer. Kids who believed that computers could build worlds, that destiny might be hidden in something ordinary. It never conquered the box office, but it conquered memory. And sometimes, that lasts longer. Number 20. 2 decades later, The Last Starfighter returned in a form no one expected. Not on screen, but on stage. In 2004, a theater company reimagined the film as a full musical. Galactic battles were transformed into songs. Destiny became a duet. Arcade bleeps echoed through live performances. It was strange, campy, completely unnecessary. And it worked. The production wasn't meant to dominate Broadway. It existed for the fans, the ones who had carried the film forward for years. It proved something important. The story was flexible. strong enough to survive translation into an entirely different medium. The Gunstar had once been rendered with cutting-edge CGI. Now it lived under stage lights. A reminder that imagination, once released, refuses to stay contained. Since 2008, rumors of a sequel or reboot have never fully died. Scripts have been drafted, pitches have circulated, studios have circled the property, sensing its nostalgic pull. Big names expressed interest, legal complications and hesitation kept everything grounded. Nothing ever launched. Yet the idea persists. In an era obsessed with revivals, The Last Starfighter remains a prime candidate, a cult film built on dreams, technology, and unfinished business. A story that feels even more relevant in a world shaped by games, simulations, and digital worlds. Alex Rogan never officially returned to the cockpit, but the dream never shut down. The Last Starfighter began as a daydream in an arcade and became proof that computers could build worlds as vivid as imagination itself. It survived near misses, fragile technology, erased scenes, and modest expectations. It never became the next Star Wars. And maybe that was the point. It was smaller, stranger, riskier, and because of that, unforgettable. Sometimes the highest score isn't on a screen. It's the legacy a story leaves behind.